Thank you, and let me start by commending you for this great initiative and the whole or strong willingness to take on such a difficult task, both supporting individual people in need of protection and solidarity, but also take on this larger task of trying to explain or mobilize political understanding and will. What I will do during the next 25-30 minutes is to try to help place the discussion and situation of displacements here in Norway, in Oslo today, in the larger picture. I always believe that if you want to have influence in politics, you need to understand your own role in the larger context. So knowing that Bjarte is an expert on the European asylum regime and everything that happens both in Norway and other European countries, I will stick to the global situation. I will give you lots of facts. And it's up to you to take note. I think we will also publish this on your website afterwards. But since we see so many facts and so many facts, figures, relations presented in the political debate, I think it's important to present some of the current updated situation. So call this facts and reflections from my side. Before I go into the larger numbers, I have very often, in working with refugees, stateless, irregulars, whatever, I felt this unjust situation of, you wanted more loud? Okay. It's almost coincidental who ends up where in this big game of migration and crossing borders. Just think of a family of 5 people, 5 brothers and sisters. It could be from so many different countries. This could be 5 brothers and sisters from Iraq. It could be 5 brothers and sisters from the Palestinian territories. It could be from Iran. It could be from Somalia, many other countries. They are all under tremendous pressure. They come from a state, a fragile state, weak state, poor state, very often a war-torn country. Let's think about the plight of 5 different brothers and sisters that all feel they need to do something to gain security, to gain the prospect of a future life in dignity. So one of the brothers and sisters emigrate to Canada. We see that a lot of what we call regular migration actually is part of solving oppression. You're under pressure, you move. You don't seek asylum, you just get out of it. And you get yourself into a situation where you can send back money to your family and support the rest of the family. Another brother or sister decides to seek asylum in Europe. And I say almost by chance, comes to a country or is able to build up an argument to receive asylum. Could be in this country, could be in another country. But the third brother or sister takes the same route, comes to Europe, presents the same application, and is rejected. We see that again and again and again, that quite similar cases. I'm sure you have argued that so many times also from this organization or the groups many of you represent. 2 very close cases. One decided in one country is accepted, the other one is rejected. Or in the same country over time, like in this country, only a few years back, humanitarian grounds were more than enough to be granted a stay in Norway, protection in Norway, permanency in Norway. The same cases are rejected today. It's extremely frustrating The law hasn't changed much, but the whole political atmosphere has turned sour. And now we see the same cases being rejected. But again, still people from the same family, same background, same needs for protection and security. The fourth brother and sister could easily have drowned in the Mediterranean trying to get to Europe. The fifth brother and sister will usually decide to still be living at home, at times maybe even as an internally displaced person. So many times in my more than 20 years career dealing with refugees and displaced people in different situations, I found this the coincidental plight of people in the same situation. What I will try to do now is to look at some of the great, larger movements and maybe try to explain why it's like this, why so many different regimes, so many different destinations. Do you happen to know how many migrants there are in the world today? If you take all the people that are registered, living outside their own countries, legally or illegally, it's about 3% of the world population. That means 214 million people live outside the borders of their own countries. 214 million people. Of these, half of these migrants are women. That's probably a new trend. There used to be more men going abroad to work or for different reasons seeking protection. Now there are absolutely 50-50, just as many women as men. But here comes an important number, and that explains some of the difficulties also in this country. Of all these 214 million people, do you happen to know how many are refugees? How many of these people do explicitly say that they move because of their security situation? That's actually less than 7.5%. Only 7.5% of all movement across border is because of violence or the necessity to move for that reason. But again, let's go back to the brothers and sisters. These numbers could have been quite different. If it had been easier to move legally, a lot of these people that in other cases would have sought asylum would just have moved. Let me take a parallel. There is a concern, an international concern about brain drain. Well-educated people leaving development countries. Malawi is such an example. They have fairly good education, or at least they have access to fairly good education. They get educated as health workers, and where do they end up? In Manchester, UK, or elsewhere, in our part of the world. So, Manchester gains one doctor, Malawi loses one doctor. Thing is, this doctor, she could have been one of the 5, or she could have been one of a big group of families that decides that one of us or a few of us need to go to the developed world to be breadwinners, to have something to send back home. If we now move to our side of the picture and say, well, who gets to get jobs in countries like the UK or Norway? Only well-educated people. So the only person able to legally leave Malawi is actually the doctor. This other person that could have done the same or been of the same use for the family by having just a regular job would not get a work permit in our part of the world. So the way we sort out people, we want the people with the highest education for our own sake. We actually contribute to the brain drain the way we work. So, and back to my main point. The set of laws, regulations, and politics around the world is part of what decides how many actually ends up as refugees. Because a lot more than these 7.5%, I come back to the numbers, will need some kind of protection and are forced to use these different routes. And as I said, sadly, some of these routes end up in the Mediterranean. We have seen numbers, I'm sure, Bjarte, you must have more updated numbers, but I've seen numbers of, could be 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 people dying on the way to our part of the world every year. So again, going back to these more than 200 million migrants, authorities, researchers think that more than 10% of the totality are irregular, could be as many as 20%. In Africa, some will claim that, well, any migrant in Africa is irregular, because we don't count that way, we don't register in the same way. Anyhow, what we see in Norway with regard to numbers is not special. We don't have particularly many refugees. We don't have particularly many irregulars or people that are by some politicians deemed illegal. We are more or less in the picture of most countries these days. I'll give you some surprising examples later in my presentation here. But again, from what kind of countries to what kind of countries do people move? If we split all migrants in the world in 3 equal parts, 1/3 of all migrants move between developing countries. They move from Africa to Africa, Asia to Asia, Latin America to Latin America. 1/3 of all migrants move between developed countries. They move within Europe, within the US, Canada, Australia. Only 1/3 of all migrants move between a developing country to a developed country. That's one of the myths. They all want to come to Norway. No. Most migrants migrate to a neighboring country on their own continent. Well, all kinds of people want to come here. No. Look at the people seeking asylum in Norway. They all come from countries that are hit by war or conflict. We don't have people coming here seeking other routes from countries where they have some kind of safety. I think that's always the best argument. Listen, we could be stateless from Palestine. The big numbers nowadays is still Somalis. It's a stateless country. But again, there are so many routes here. Security is obviously a main reason to flee for individuals. But let's not underestimate the power of getting to a richer country and send money back home. That's such a strong power in all movement of people. Do you know how many people left this country for America a little bit more than 100 years ago? 800,000 people. And what did they do? They sent money back home. Also. We have been through the same. In my part of this country, just east of Oslo, in the 1880s, the church and governmental authorities asked people to leave the country. There's not enough space in Norway. There's not enough land. Leave for Canada and the US. That's part of our history. Okay, then coming to a better situation, a job. These people, the migrants of today, I'm talking about 2010, recent statistics, the migrants today send $440 billion back to developing countries. I'm not talking about to developed countries. $440 billion. That's more than all aid. Development aid is much more than private investments. This is the strongest financial transfer of capital to developing countries in any comparison. From individuals washing dishes, being doctors, nurses, whatever. Such a strong force. That means, I'm not saying that that is a strong argument for the individual, but that means that each time we, or Norwegian authorities, deny someone the access to work, we also close the transfer of money, maybe life-saving money, to the family back home. We see this in all countries. The big discussion in Kenya these days is that for the large Somalia refugee population in Kenya, who wants to work in Nairobi and elsewhere in order to support their families, same issue. Canadian authorities say, no, we don't want you to work. If you do, it's illegal and all that. And they close off the possibility for that family to survive either in the refugee camp, in exile, or back home in Somalia. I have numbers on the global distribution of migrants that could be part of what we put out on the internet. I'm not going in detail. Let me specialize more on those 7.5% that are refugees. That means that at the moment, as we stand here, I'm standing here, you're sitting, as I stand here and speak, we have 16 million registered refugees around the world. 16. Of which 5 million are Palestinians. And here is, when you hear these numbers, there is always a confusion. Due to political sensitivity, Palestinians are not protected by the High Commissioner for Refugees. Already back in the 1950s, the UN and the world decided to organize the aid for Palestinian refugees under UNRWA, this special UN agency for Palestinians. So we have 5 million under the auspices or protection of UNRWA, and then we have 11 million under the UNHCR. Sometimes that could mean a difference because UNHCR has a clearer mandate to protect. And UNHCR is much more, Bjarte would be interested to hear if you agree, but I think that the UNHCR is a much stronger political force and is a strong, they can drive a stronger argument for the sake of protection for those 11 millions. UNRWA is quite blocked in the political stalemate between Middle East countries and parts of the West. The High Commission for Refugees protect more people than these 16. They protect some internally displaced people and people in other situations, but they operate with 16 million refugees. That has actually decreased over the years I've been working in this field. Only some few years back we were closer to 20 millions. Not that that's, I mean, it's still way too high. So where are these people? I should also mention, as we also have a big group of Palestinians in Norway, that the UNHCR, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, also have a special mandate for stateless people. And they say that some claim that we have 12 million stateless people today. Others say, no, it's not more than 3-4 million. Doesn't matter. It's tragedy. Every person that ends up being stateless represents a terrible plight of no rights in the country where she or he resides. I will turn over to solution in a while. But before I do that, I would give an argument for keeping to fairly formal definitions when we talk about these people. Why? Because there are international legislation that gives protection. There is a Refugee Convention of 1951. which obliges countries to take this into national law and give protection. So it matters whether you're within the refugee definition or outside. That's why the Palestinian refugee, the Palestinian refugee situation is treated quite differently. Everybody is waiting for the peace between Israel and neighboring countries, while in other situations there's a steady urge or political discussion on how to find a rural solution. And then we hear that even bigger numbers nowadays have to flee because of natural disasters. Ecological refugees, someone could call them. And that's fine, it's okay. With the press, it's okay when we want to talk about that as a phenomenon. But this is dangerous. If we start to talk about 42 million ecological refugees in the same terms, we start to talk about need for protection. These people usually don't have need for protection. They need food, water, shelter, and all that. But it's important that we reserve the right to protection, international legislation, to the 16 well-defined refugees. You follow my line of thought? Please interrupt and please ask questions, but this is quite key. Some say, well, they had to flee, so they are refugees. No. If there's one thing a lot of states would like to see, so it is to water out the refugee protection regime. There is a 1951 protocol, and states better stick to that or keep to that. If we say, well, everyone claiming to be a refugee for all kinds of reasons should be a refugee, we actually water out the legislation. Terminology matters here. Maybe a few words about the global distribution of refugees so that you have a clear picture. Which is the big refugee continent nowadays? This has changed dramatically over the last few years. It's by any comparison Asia, by any comparison, the big number of the world's refugees come from Asian countries these days. We used to have large numbers in Central America, Latin America, the rest of Latin America, Africa. Now it's very much reduced. Big countries are from Afghanistan and Iraq. And where do these refugees reside? You know which 3 countries host the largest number of refugees? We can run a quiz, it's a Saturday evening. So which is number 1 country hosting refugees in the world? Any guess? Pakistan. Close to 2 million people, refugees in Pakistan. Second largest refugee hosting country? Iran. Third largest, and this is quite interesting, if you look at this geopolitically, third largest country, Syria, also a million. So you have close to 2 million in Pakistan, close to 1 million or a little bit more than 1 million in Iran, close to 1 million in Syria. Who knows what happens there now? I think some of the people leaving Syria are already refugees from other places. Again, this matters. When we compare Norway and Europe to other continents, we are not having the heaviest burdens. The heaviest burdens are in very different parts of the world. And seen from the High Commissioner for Refugees, in his report to states of the world, in his executive committee where ambassadors and ministers from all over the world come, his name is Antonio Guterres nowadays, he reports on protection under pressure. When he looks at the world at large, he finds that the tendencies we see in Norway, with more and more difficulties to obtain protection on different grounds, is something that is a general trend all over the world. He says it's sadly going in the wrong direction. I mean, that it doesn't comfort us much. It could comfort some Norwegian politicians. but it's a sad fact. So it's important to fight for the principal sides of this. It's important to unite with people elsewhere, because it's actually the same fight going on almost all over the world. That's why we might disagree. I'm not so concerned about Fortress Europe, because every single European country is in the same state as most other states all over the world. It's just a little bit more organized in Europe, but that has its positive sides also. I guess we'll come back to that in the discussion. But my main point is protection is at the moment under pressure all over the world. Okay, 12 million people plus stateless. What are the solutions? We talk about 3 possible solutions. One solution is to integrate where you are, local integration. Second solution is to return back to your country of origin. Unless you're stateless, then there are no states to return to. Third option is to be resettled in a third country. These are the only ways out. There are no other theoretical doable solutions. Maybe but one, and I would like to add that, because I think for many of the people here in the Palestinian group, the Eritrean group, and other groups in Norway that are stuck, there is actually a fourth option. It's not a solution, but we see that more and more people use that option, and that's onwards movement. You don't find any of the 3 traditional solutions of repatriation, local integration, or resettlement, so you keep on moving to other countries. If you go into the refugee camps in Kenya nowadays with the Somalis, what is their life strategy? Many will say, I don't see any future back in Somalia. Kenya don't want us. We will not be resettled. That means that some other country will open up and say, you can come here. In Norwegian, kvoteflyktning is a word for resettlement. So they will say, okay, my only option is to go underground and continue my travel from country to country. So onward migration is actually becoming, in practical terms, not a solution, but a way out of things for the time being. This is so difficult. The High Commissioner for Refugees says that out of the 12 million refugees, he sees that at least 7 million are stuck in what they call protracted refugee situations. That means a situation without any foreseeable solution. You look into your crystal ball and you don't see any solution in the foreseeable future. 7 million people. So what are the numbers here? How many people in 2010 returned back to their countries of origin? Of the 12 million. 200,000. 200,000. Only 200,000 people went back. More than half of them was back to Afghanistan. This is the lowest number of returns in 20 years. It's getting tougher out there. It's getting tougher. Maybe I should mention that in a parenthesis. Why then have the total numbers of refugees gone down? Most probably because there are lesser international conflicts in the world. Not much help to someone that is in this situation, person in this situation now. But going back to the durable solutions, only 200,000, lowest in 20 years, were able to voluntarily go back home. Resettlement, that means that you're in a stuck situation and someone applies to the UN and say, could this person come to Norway or the US or Canada, wherever? 22 countries in the world, 22 countries have said we are willing to take resettlement cases. The US used to take large numbers before September 11, 2001. That changed almost the whole picture overnight. After 11 September 2001, it was almost impossible to resettle Muslims. Suddenly it became a big political issue. Who are the resettled people? So, to put it in how can I say, daily terms, the world started to look for good Christians and other peaceful people in their minds to resettle. This is a harsh reality. It was so difficult for people with a special religious background or from special countries to obtain or to get this special solution. Anyways, these 22 countries last year, or in 2010, took out 100,000 people. So 100,000 refugees were brought to other countries. Norway take at the moment 12, 14, 1,500 in that range at the moment. I'll try to land because I'm sure that I've sparked off things that you would like to discuss, or maybe you have other questions here. Just to discuss a few of the terms I used before I close. When I talk about refugees, many of these people, they cross a border between countries in an extremely difficult situation. So it's not a question of filing an asylum application. Asylum applications is something that we see in Europe and some few other countries. So asylum claims count for less than 1 million of the 12 million I've been referring to. Less than is only about 850,000. And here comes quiz number 2. Which country in the world receives most asylum claims? Okay? Somalis moving to Kenya doesn't claim asylum. They cross the border and they are registered as refugees because they come from that situation. But where individuals very often illegally cross the border, because that's the craziness here. You cannot legally cross borders to seek asylum. That's just, we could discuss that for the rest of the afternoon, I think. Which country in the world receives the highest number of asylum claims? You wouldn't guess. South Africa. South Africa received in 2010 180,000 asylum claims. Second, the US, a little bit more than 50,000. And then came Europe. I mean, Europe together, where I think we saw a couple of 100,000 or something. France, biggest country, with close to 50,000 back in 2010. But just think about South Africa. That means that what we talk about, Norway, how can we attract so many refugees? What is this? South Africa, people from Mozambique, Angola, neighboring countries, not least Zimbabwe, 180,000, because they are seen as a safer country than the countries of origin. Okay, conclusions, or at least summing up from my side. Refugees, stateless people that end up as irregular, or that some say called illegal, I hate to use that term, in countries like Norway, all come from countries of conflict. Statistics are clear. People don't flee countries if they don't have to. No matter perspective, for all these people I mentioned with the big statistical numbers, return is absolutely not an alternative. For so many of these people, return is no alternative. It's nothing special with Norway, it's nothing special here. It's just not an alternative in so many cases. But the political rhetoric pretends like that's the only solution. You did not fulfill the criteria, you have to go home. Return, return, return. It's almost sickening to hear this rhetoric, which never ever will work for the individuals. It works temporarily for the political debate in our political climate at the moment. And the longer it takes for states to accept this fact that you need to locally integrate people, you need to find other solutions, the more people will have to suffer unnecessarily. The only goal, or the only possible solution, is to help people get papers, get registered, get work, get a way of living, so they can continue with their lives. I thank you for the attention.